Hi, everybody. I'm Michael R. Underwood. I'm going to be reading for you a short bit from my novel Annihilation Aria, which came out just this July, last month. It's a found family space opera in the style of Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor Ragnarok, Firefly, or the 1999 Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, The Mummy. I'm just going to read from the first chapter and then a little bit into the second chapter as time permits. And I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions, either questions folks may have about what I read or anything else about writing. I also work in publishing as my day job, and I do an actual play podcast. So I do a bunch of different things. Some people may be here that already know me. Otherwise, if you have questions about writing or publishing, I'm happy to answer those. We have a hard out at 20 minutes after the hour, so I will try to wrap up before that, just to make everything easy. So I'm going to go ahead and start with, this is the first chapter of Annihilation Aria. Max Walker was very good at running for his life. He had plenty of motivation, given the ravenous horde of purple space locusts nipping at his heels. He cradled the mapping device in his arms, shielding it from the locusts. Dying would be bad. Coming out empty-handed wouldn't be much better. It was that kind of day. You really should have come up with a better plan, but hindsight is 20/20, and hey, you've got a kick-ass wife with a giant sword beside you, so it's not all bad day. Unfortunately for Max, those days were pretty common, but hey, he hadn't died yet. Laura Cavane, said kick-ass wife, ran beside him, keeping stride, though she could have easily lapped him any time she wanted. Lucky for him, she decided that she liked him enough to save him from the aforementioned horde of space locusts. Even wearing a 20-kilo set of EVA-capable armor, Lara moved with impeccable grace. It made sense, though, since she spent more time in her armor than out of it. A soldier-cased Janae, Lara was made for battle. Even when she was running for her life, she wasn't really worried, as far as he could tell. They fled the tomb so fast that Max could barely maintain his mental record of the turns and doorways and puzzles that had taken them hours to work through on their way in. But now there was only running and holding onto the mapping device, which would maybe, possibly, hopefully, give Max and Lara the information they needed to finally make real progress on their respective missions. One of the locust beasties ripped a chunk off the heel of the spacesuit. Air bled out like a whoopee cushion, and his O2 gauge started sagging. "We need to run faster," Lara said, still calm despite the odds. "This is me running faster," Max replied through huffs and puffs. Max kept his eyes forward even as he felt the beast scraping at his heels and crunching beneath his feet. They were gaining. None of this would have happened if the tomb had been properly sealed. But no, some grave robbers had gotten to the site before them and screwed everything up. Great job, assholes. He'd refrained from kicking their skeletons. It wouldn't help. "Keep going," Lara said, and he felt her drop back. Oh, the vid feed from Lara's suit showed the horde of locust beasts swarming her, the screen filling with purple creatures and their black teeth. "Die, beasts!" she shouted, her scattergun barking death in every direction. "Wheel is just around the corner. I will catch up." More gunshots, more dead locusts. But the next sound was different, a cry of pain from Lara. Max hailed their pilot, Wheel, on the ship. "We got swarmers here. Need a hot extraction." Max hailed, "No atmo, no flamethrower, kid," came Wheel's reply. On easier days, Max would describe Wheel as terse. He could see more of Lara and the diminished cloud of locusts, her armor gouged and slashed in dozens of places. But the smile on her blue-hued face told him she'd be fine. "Hit the wall," she called. Max dove to the side. It'd only taken a few months to accept that in a fight, Lara knew best. The blast from the shattergun disintegrated another chunk of the swarm, and Lara burst free, the creatures fading into the shadows. She staggered forward, swatting away a few stragglers. "Get us out of here, now!" They took the final corner and ran down the rest of the hallway. Max's O2 gauge was tickling the red. The kettle's forward lights flashed through the small passageway Lara had dug through the rubble. It had only been a few hours, though it felt like days ago. "Standing by. One of these days, you kids are going to walk leisurely out of a tomb, arms full of loot, and not pursued by anything." Max chuckled. We wouldn't want to give you a heart attack, Wheel grumbled. I mean, if that did happen, those nanites would just jumpstart you, right? Better to nail the jump than count on the net, kid. Laura's feet pounded on the floor of the temple foyer as they approached the rubble. There was never real doubt that we would succeed. Max crawled through the tunnel, still babying the mapping device. The hole of the kettle opened like the maw of a friendly fish, Wheel holding the ship steady. Laura followed shortly after, sword first, since she couldn't fit with the blade locked onto the back of her suit. He offered her a hand as she emerged from the tunnel. She took it and squeezed, letting him help, even though she was fine on her own. It was one of the many ways they showed one another that they were a team, always looking out for one another. Like when she'd sit up with him as he was studying, even though his research could literally put her to sleep. Max took one last look at the tomb as the ship pulled away, the ramp rising to close. Another brush with death, another run and gun engagement, and if they were lucky, another step closer to home. But whose home? And what did that mean for him and Laura? Chapter 2, Laura. Laura sang Savo's Embrace to her armor in the sun-soaked cargo hold. The Embrace was an aria of resilience and rebirth from the epic Azore, sung originally by a love-struck guardian to the princess who was her charge. The song awakened the suit, allowing her armor to repair itself using the sun's energy. The coral steel resonated with her voice, stitching itself back together, scalloped ridges and joints sealing and smoothing over. One by one, traces of her and Max's last misadventure faded, and the suit returned to its optimal form. Laura stood in underclothes, the cargo hold baking as mostly filtered sunlight streamed through the starboard portal. The portal nearly filled an entire side of the cargo bay, 8 meters high and 10 meters wide. The radiation of the nearby star was reduced such that it would not harm her, but would still power the suit's regenerative capacity, guided by her song. And it might help restore the lustrous azure tone her skin had gained during that summer working century on the grain farms of Acre. Her voice was low, solid, like packed earth. Her mother's had been richer, like fresh-tilled soil. Halra Cavane had sung to Laura all her life, taught her all the songs needed to operate the suit and to fight as a royal guardian. The greatest power of the Janae was conveyed through song, from the marches of the royal guards to the songs of restoration, as well as the snippets Laura had picked up from other Janae. But Laura's repertoire was a mere shadow of the full power of the soldier caste. So much of their legacy had been lost. Laura lifted the heel of one of the suit's legs and watched the puncture hole close over. More warmth slid into her tone as she continued, diving into the chorus. Savo's Embrace was meant to be sung in call and response, sergeant to her squad. She taught it to Max, but with the way he fought, mostly through stealth and hiding behind solid objects, it failed to serve its original purpose. The Embrace sang strength into a squad's suits and their limbs, recalling the rebirth brought with the sun's return in the spring. Max stood on the other side of the cargo hold, bent over his laboratory and research desk, where he had hooked their just liberated device into his terminal. Up a ladder from the hold were the gunner's turret, the living quarters, and the hatch to the engine room. Above that, at the top and front of the ship, was the cockpit, Wheel's domain. Max all but lived at his desk. In the 7 years Laura had known him, he'd always been driven, focused, but also kind, charming. He remembered names as easily as textual citations, but not songs. Singing was hard for him, his voice thin. He had an ear for language, but not music. It was a cosmic joke, one of many. The suit was whole and her song complete. She left it in the sun to absorb energy, her greatsword locked in place on the suit's back. How goes the decryption? Laura took her customary place to Max's left, looking on as he worked. Mostly there. Anything I can't crack, Owen can take care of. Anyway, he likes it when I go to him for help. I think he enjoys feeling useful. Or that you still have more to learn. Max nodded, the wall lamps illuminating his brown skin. Which is true. This section here still makes absolutely no sense to me. And without that, I can't tell if the chart is telling us to go into the center of the forbidden sectors, or if it wants us to go beyond warp space. Surely it is the former. Warp space delineated the known galaxies. Beyond these bounds, ships crawled along at a fraction of the speed of warp travel. The forbidden sectors were so dubbed because they held the core of the old Atlan Empire, destroyed by the Visenk in their usurpation. But since those broken or abandoned planets contain forgotten old Atlan technology, they were an ideal place to hunt for artifacts. I sure hope so, Max said. Not sure we could convince Wheel to take a 3-month trip on burners only. You want me to take the ship where now? Wheel called down the echoing halls of their ship. The kettle was small enough that it was hard to ever truly be out of the earshot. Nowhere yet, Max shouted back. Lara laid a kiss on his temple, her fingers trailing along his shoulder and neck as a reminder and a promise. Let me know if you need any help. She relished in his happy shudder and hauled herself up the ladder by the door to the engine room. She walked by her shared quarters with Max, Wheel's quarters, the bathroom, the gunnery station, the ship's meager galley, and then up another short ladder to the cockpit. Kruji snored in one corner, curled up in his straw-laden cage. The Molja was a mass of tentacles and feathers and had no practical use aside from boosting morale. Wheel was elbow deep in the kettle's control console. The Atlan's skin was the color of faded moonstone, arms and much of her back replaced by cybernetic implants. When she plugged in all the way, the console grew to meet her, screen connecting to a cybernetic eye, panels and switches sprouting cables to interface directly with Wheel via ports from head to hip. The Atlan were the only species fully adapted to cybernetic enhancements, allowing them to control spaceships through a neural link. Lara or Max could pilot the kettle, but only Wheel could truly inhabit it. Atlan cybernetics spanned a wide range of technologies, none more fiercely guarded than those allowing direct connection with the ship's computers and warp drives. Lara and Max had been working with Wheel, and as a result, living on the kettle for several years. Wheel was taciturn, mostly liked being left to herself in the ship's business, but she had unparalleled contacts, including fences who would take nearly any old Atlan artifact Lara and Max could find. The Atlan had once ruled warp space, but when the Visenk took over, the Atlan homeworld was destroyed and the survivors scattered to the winds. They survived by adapting and through their monopoly on the capacity to interface with warp drives. What took a day's travel via warp space would take months otherwise. Now, the Atlan were pilots, mechanics, engineers. They'd made themselves essential, but rarely had held power beyond their lock on transportation. The Visenk resented the Atlan's adaptations and continued to scapegoat them at every turn. How's the Imperial traffic? Lara looked out the view screen into the black. Sensors would pick up anything before her eyes would, but she couldn't break the habit. And any system could fail. Always trust yourself more than your gear, her mother had sung to her time and time again. That line was one of dozens from a song she'd composed to a traditional tune, an amalgamation of half-remembered lessons from her own youth. Wheel's arm twisted, and a map with dozens of red dots popped up on the screen next to Lara, showing their weaving path through gaps left between Imperial sensors. No patrols within range, just the buoys they've got littered around the system like Drell droppings. To hear them tell the tale, the Visenk Imperium had ruled for 10,000 years. They created the universe and loved their creation so much that they chose to live among their children as benevolent god emperors. Lies. All of it. The Visenk had overthrown the old Atlan and made warp space their own 1,000 years ago. Since then, they tried to erase every bit of history they could, controlling schools, outlawing texts, and enforcing an imperial monopoly on comm relays. The Visenk kept a tight grip. But the Visenk had destroyed a half-dozen inhabited worlds along the way, eliminating most of the Atlan's greatest technology. The Empire could keep the real histories in the margins, but people remembered the truth of the Visenk's rise and the Atlan's fall. Most were just smart enough not to say so where the Visenk could hear them. The last people to challenge the Visenk had been the Janae, Lara's people. The Janae gave the Visenk their greatest challenge, but in the end, even the battle songs of her sisters were powerless against the Visenk superweapon, the devastation. The Vasink cracked the entire planet of Genos into several pieces, ending the war in one stroke. The surviving Janae, including Lara's great-great-grandmother, scattered on the solar winds, swearing vengeance and pledging to restore the crown. The Vasink were many things: cruel, arrogant, aggressive, but above all else, they were absolutists. They prized decisive victories. With more than 24 systems to patrol, however, the Vasink couldn't be everywhere at all times. By best estimates, there were only a few thousand of them, even after centuries of aggressive breeding programs to counteract their low fertility. They leaned heavily on a vassal-driven military, which meant Lara and Max could operate at the edges, keep off the radar, and be about their missions without running afoul of Imperial forces for more than a bribe here or there, coming and going from the docking stations, most of the time. How long until we're back at the wreck, Lara asked. Without attracting Imperial attention? Better part of 2 days. Max walked into the cockpit on the comms. That should be plenty of time to figure this thing out and be ready to chat with Ewan. 2 days it is, Lara said. I'm going to check our supplies, see how much of our payment we'll need to end up pouring back into the ship. Wheel cocked her head to the side the way that she did when she was analyzing data. Kettle's plenty hungry, but she can last a while if need be. As long as you two are fine eating algae paste. Max made a sound of mock delight. Just like Mama used to make. Why not? Lara asked. It's incredibly efficient food. Growing up, efficient food wasn't available. You took what you could get. Max had come from Earth, an industrialized, non-spacefaring culture, but at least they too had music, so they were odd, not barbaric. Lara slipped into a song of memory as she began her rounds, tallying spare parts, rations, and more. The song helped her hold the numbers and details in her head, a musical memory palace. They'd survived another adventure, and now the song of battle and exploration gave way to the daily work songs of maintenance and travel, until the next explosion, which would inevitably come sooner than they expected. So that's a quick taste of Annihilation Aria, which is meant to start a series. There's only one book out so far. There will be more if it does well. This is kind of how things can be in publishing. You can get it in print, ebook, and in audio. The audio publisher Dreamscape Media actually got 2 narrators, so it's really fun to hear each of them kind of bring their own creative energy and skill to the work. We've got it out in a fair number of libraries, and it's going to be available on all print and ebook retailers. If anybody has any quick questions, we have about 2 minutes before we are hard out. So hit those in the Discord, and then the room moderator will bring those to me. But in the meantime, thank you very much to everybody who stopped by to watch the reading. Again, my name is Michael R. Underwood. Annihilation Aria is just one of many books that I've written. I've done a geeky urban fantasy series, a science fiction series called Genre Nuts. I also am a podcaster. I will occasionally appear on the Skiffy and Fanty Show, and I am a co-host on Speculate, which is a actual play podcast starring science fiction and fantasy professionals. We have a campaign of Blades in the Dark running right now, run by Brandon O'Brien, who's an amazing writer, poet, game designer, and editor. But yeah, that's me, and this has been Annihilation Aria, book 1 of the space operas, because why not have a very cheeky series name? So thank you very much for everybody who has watched. Thank you so much to the kind of room staff and to the con staff at NASFiC Columbus. And I will see everybody else on the internet. You can find me at underwood.com or on Twitter at Mike R. Underwood. Thanks.